Alright, so to clear out some space as far as time is concerned in class to really drill down into the impacts of World War II and a lot of the other things that we've got to cover, what I want to do is I definitely want to cover I won't say the minor details, but the course of the war, how the war played out. I want to do that in video form. There's going to be two different videos. This one's going to focus on Europe. The other one's going to focus on the Pacific. We're going to start with what we focused on first anyway, which was getting Hitler, fighting the war in Europe. Yet we do get pulled into the war because of the Pacific. We'll get there, we'll talk about it, but let's go ahead and jump in on what's going to be the largest theater of the war, the most intensive part of the war. Most of the people that are going to die in World War II, it's because of the European theater. Alright, so how did it happen? Well, we kind of know the rise of fascism and all of that, but if we're really drawing it back to a beginning point, it's really World War I. The ending of World War I sets up some of the issues that leads into World War II. We know we had some problems with the Treaty of Versailles. We know that war guilt clause, that the Germans aren't going to like it. Plus the reparations are going to destroy the German economy. So much so that they have a real culture crisis in the 1920s. Communism and socialism on the rise, and anti-communism and anti-socialism is going to rise as well. So there's going to be this conflict of ideologies that's ripping at Germany in the 1920s as they're going through a very severe economic depression. So they're looking for a restoration of German pride. They want to believe in something again. They want their power back. They want their respect back. So we're going to see that in a couple of different things, but the main manifestation of it is going to be a very overt nationalism brought about by the Nazi Party that is going to really focus on the restoration of Germany's pride through a rejection of the reparation payments, a restoration of the German army and naval capabilities, and expansion, and going beyond the idea of Germany itself and pushing for a greater Germany. So what do I mean about a greater Germany? Well, going back to World War I, you remember that we had that idea of ethnic nationalism, that the identity of the Serbs didn't mean just people in Serbia. It meant any people with Serbian blood, and that they wanted to kind of get together into one force and one government and rule themselves. Same thing here in World War II. The German people are trusting that Hitler is going to unite all the German-speaking peoples of the world, and there will be a restoration of the glory days of Germany. And he also has a convenient scapegoat for the reasons why Germany fell from that pedestal anyway. Alright, so let's take a look. Alright, reparations in the Weimar Republic, what we were just talking about. The reparation payments, what's going to happen is that the Weimar Republic, which is the government that takes over Germany after Kaiser Wilhelm is abdicating and getting out of there. Right? It's a democratic government, not that dissimilar from our own. But the big problem is how to keep up with these reparation payments. So they come up with an awesome idea. Let's just print money. I say that facetiously. That's a terrible idea. What it does is it's going to cause hyperinflation. And this is what you see right here. The money is so worthless that she's using it for burning, for heat. That's how bad the hyperinflation has gotten in Germany. Now, if you remember back to our Great Depression and the New Deal, we kind of get involved with this, with the Dawes plan to kind of finance Germany so they can make their payments, and we get that money from Britain, but we also have the debt coming back from Germany. All right, so we're involved in this a bit as well. At about the same time, as Germany is suffering, now they haven't really gone the route of supporting the Nazis just yet. At the same time, the whole world is trying to really make good on that effort by Woodrow Wilson for this to be the last war. So we have the League of Nations working, although it's toothless, and more people are starting to realize that it's toothless. We do have other people coming together. We're going to sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. 15 nations are going to renounce war. And really what they're talking about is offensive war. Right? We pledge that we will not invade our neighbors to take their land. That's essentially what they are agreeing to. You don't really have to outlaw defensive war. If you're being attacked, you have your rights to defend yourself. But it's that offensive war that is being outlawed here. So the neutrality, which I think this slide is a little out of place, so I'm going to skip it for a second. I may come back to it later. But America in the 1920s, and more so in the 1930s, people were going to debate whether we're truly isolationists because we are going to intervene in Latin America. But as far as a grand global foreign policy, we are going to shrink. We are going to shrink back. Remember, we're not part of the League of Nations. We're not really involved in other parts of the world as much as we were, especially during World War I. So we have these neutralities. So, and again, I think this is a little bit out of place. It should be a little bit further down when the war is actually starting. So I apologize for that. So one of the first kind of feelings that we think, especially in Europe, a lot of this starts earlier with Japan. Japan's going to expand out a little bit earlier than Germany does. But in Europe, the first time that we see really things starting is the Spanish Civil War. So the Spanish Civil War is an extremely kind of messy internal civil war between two different factions in Spain. One of them is the Republicans and the other one is the Nationalists. One side is essentially a group of different liberal kind of ideologies, and I say that's not liberal as a Democrat, but the idea of a free government, free thought, free speech, compared to a very repressive things of the way they have always been. The church and the state are the most powerful institutions in the country. That will be done by law. So there's two major ideological conflicts here. All right, basically a fascist government versus a socialist / kind of proto-communist government. They're being funded by two different regimes. The Nazis and the Italians are going to be funding the I'm trying to remember. I'm getting these things confused in my head. The nationalist government, and really Britain and France try to fund the Republican side, but they don't do a really good job of it. The Soviets come in, they send some supplies to the Republican government, and some American volunteers. Nothing that we're doing. Remember, we're pretty isolationist here. But there are people seeing this as a battle for the soul of a nation that, if some things aren't contained here, could spread further. So there are going to be things called the Abraham Lincoln Brigades, and I think that's the next slide, of Americans who are very concerned about the Popular Front falling to the nationalist forces, and they volunteer to go over there and fight. So the loyalists, in the end, what's going to happen is that the fascist leaders, the fascist government's going to essentially win out. They start an invasion in the south of the country. They unite. They finally capture Madrid. Once they capture Madrid, essentially the thing's over, and that will be the end of it. Up towards the northern part of the country, there's the Basque region that is going to have German fighters, German bombers are going to be used in attacks in that region, supporting Franco, who is the fascist leader. So this is where you get Pablo Picasso's Guernica painting, which is a very famous painting, kind of expressing what it's like to be in Guernica while these German bombers are bombing the town. So let's take a look at the Axis powers and size up both sides. So Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler is going to be there with the Nazi Party. Now, Nazism is kind of a different part of fascism. Fascism really is when the government, it's difficult to explain fascism without basically saying it's a totalitarian government. But the idea here is that you are part of the country. The country's survival is the most important thing. You as an individual do not matter. Germany matters. Italy matters. You do not. So individual rights kind of go away. And Nazism is a separate ideology. It's got a very German twist to it. It also has the racial ideology that we know is going to be underneath, or actually at the forefront of the Holocaust. With Japan, with Emperor Hirohito, it is a bit different. It's not essentially fascism completely. It's just that the military has a massive amount of control in the government, and that government is headed by a monarch, Emperor Hirohito. He is seen as divine, as basically a god ruling here on Earth. He is not only respected, revered, he is worshipped by a lot of the Japanese population. That's going to change throughout the war, though. Alright, so the big thing here is we'll save Hirohito for another time. There are going to be smaller Axis powers. A lot of these that you see up here, they're in a tough position. They've got to decide between who do they support. The Soviets, who are at the door about to burn down everything, or the Nazis, who are at the door and about to burn down everything. So a lot of these countries are essentially, they decide that the Nazis are actually the better choice here. So these countries are going to have fascist governments, and they are just as brutal as the fascist governments in Italy and in Germany. And they'll be backed up by it. So the Allied powers, these are the big three. Us, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union is going to be the odd man out. We don't really trust them for some of the things that happens on early in the war that we'll get into in just a second. But it's the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Soviet Union. As we've seen before, the Soviet Union is going to bear the brunt of the deaths of the war. But again, we don't particularly trust Stalin. One, he's communist. Two, he's basically a dictator in all manners of the word. He's doing some things that are just as bad as what Hitler is doing. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the big thing here, though, for the war's sake, is that these guys are going to collaborate a lot. Now, sometimes they don't collaborate as quickly as Stalin wants. Remember, it's his country that's really being invaded. I mean, Churchill's being bombed, and that's really bad. We really haven't been touched, at least by the Germans, that much. But we have a unified strategy. We know what we're doing, and we're communicating what we're doing. The Axis powers, yeah, there's a little bit of coordination between the Italians and the Germans, but there's nothing going on between them and the Japanese. It's like, hey, we're here too. There's no communication going back and forth. No collaboration. All right, so that was the big three again. Alright, and there are other Allied powers, the French, Canadians, who are part of kind of the greater British Empire, and China. China's going to be a very important Allied power with us, and others as well, the Dutch and their colonies as well. Alright, so the march to war, getting into the buildup of the war. You know what we're actually going to do? We're going to stop this here. We're going to create that into, we're going to create that into another video.